Welcome back. My name is Maurizio Benazzo.
My name is Aya Benazzo, and welcome back to the part two of Talks on Trauma series. And we have an exciting conversation and a whole different lens through which we are going to look at trauma, expand the lens, actually. I'm very excited about this conversation, and we're going to introduce the guests.
Yes.
And uh,
So the first
the-
guest is Eriel Tchekwie Deranger, which is a mother from the Athabasca Chippewian First Nation and the executive director and co-founder of Indigenous Climate Action. Ariel is a member of the International Indigenous People Forum on Climate Change and was a founding member of the Global Indigenous Youth Caucus. Her work focuses on the intersectional dialogue between indigenous rights, climate justice, and other social justice movements. Her work included developing the first indigenous right-based divest movements, lobbying government officials in Canada, the USA, UK, and the United and Europe, EU, supporting and leading mass mobilization against fossil fuel and climate change. She has been with us at another event, and it was such a joy to have her. So I'm delighted and honored to have you back with us, Ariel. You're such a precious human being to this planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, sister, for being with us again. And the next guest we just met, is actually uncle, and his name is Agunuk.
Mhm.
Agunuk. Apologize for not pronouncing the name properly. Uncle is an elder traditional healer, spiritual teacher, and a shaman from Greenland. He grew up in a remote village in Greenland with three houses actually, where his grandmother recognized his gift to continue the healing tradition of the family and train him for becoming a shaman. His spiritual task given by his mother is to melt the ice of in the heart of men, to melt the ice in heart of men. Wow, that's a task.
That's a task.
His work has taken him to more than 70 countries around the world. His teaching comes from the Eskimo Kalalit, a peaceful culture that is thousands years old and has not experienced war. These teachings have enabled people to survive in one of the harshest places on earth. They call us to bridge the distance between our minds and our heart. Welcome, Uncle, and what a privilege to have you with us today.
Yes. And last but not least, our third guest is Bayo Akomolafe. Bayo is an author, speaker, teacher, and intellectual convener of the concept of post-activism, transraciality, and ontofugivity. Dr. Akomolafe has written two books, This Wild Beyond Our Fancies and We Will Tell Our Own Story. He is the executive director of the Emergence Network and chief host of the widely popular online offline course festival series named We Will Dance with Mountains. His work is inspired by the Yoruba indigenous cosmologies, and he considers his most sacred work to be learning how to be with his daughter and son and their mother. Bayo, you know how much I adore you. You're a deep, deep brother to me, and it's such a joy and an honor every time we have a chance to interact. And I'm so delighted to have you here with us again and again. And thank you.
And thank you, everyone, for being with us today. And thank you, Gabor, for hosting this conversation. And we pass it on to you next.
All right. Well, I welcome these friends, wonderful people from around the world, to this panel on climate trauma. And what we were looking for today is not just awareness of the trauma, but the wisdom that from each of your traditions you can bring to help us deal with this trauma, which right from the beginning has impacted indigenous people more immediately and now the rest of the world as well. The first warning that I read about climate change was issued in the year 1801 by a German naturalist called Alexander von Humboldt, who noticed in Venezuela that the cutting down of the forest by the colonialists was changing the climate. And he then warned that this would have grave consequences for future generations. And it's a lesson that over 200 years later, we're still having to learn. So I'm going to ask each of you, first of all, from the perspective of your own experience and your people's experience, what has been the impact of climate change? And then what I really want to go on to is what we can learn from traditional wisdom to help us resolve this crisis. So, Uncle, you being the elder here, would you please begin?
I'm so happy to meet all of you. Yes, the trauma we're experiencing with the climate change is really incredible, and it's going to get much, much worse than you and I we can ever imagine. How do we know that? From my world. I am from the top of the world in a country called Greenland, which is part of Danish territory. And there in the northern hemisphere, I live right next to the biggest ice in existence of the northern hemisphere. When I was born just about 74 years ago, on the average, it was up to 5 kilometers thick. And it was right to the very lake where my ancestors come from, where my family had lived for about 6,000 years. So that valley was protected, and that's where the animals would give birth, caribous and other animals living there. But now that finger, which protected the valley, which was 1,500 meters tall in 1963 when I went to visit the first time, is now less than 20 meters. And the big ice itself, the beach, has retreated just about 10 kilometers. And now the thickness of the ice is less than 2 kilometers. And that little river, which becomes alive in the summertime when the ice is melting because the sun is shining 24 hours a day, now runs then more than 1 million liters per second. And right now, as you and I will speak together, I sent my nephew to the beach of the big ice to see the river because he walks there right now. And it's still running more than 1 million liters per second. Just to give you a comparison, I believe that most of you would have heard about a river in Canada and United States called Niagara Falls. That river runs 750,000 liters per second. But the melt ice river on my land runs more than 1 million liters per second, 24 hours a day now for the last 3, 4 months. And there are more than 10,000 rivers like that at home. So the impact is enormous. Yes, as the ocean rises 1 millimeters, the waves become 10 times bigger. But that we know that already because I know that because my older brother he was a sailor. So 1 millimeters of increase of the ocean volume, the waves are 10 times always bigger. So now uh, this latest hurricane coming north up to Bermuda, the waves are bigger than we have seen before. So it's really very, very big impact. And now that I have traveled the world, including to the very center of the Amazonia in Brazil-Peru border, It's amazing how the land is so dry. And this is a big forest of Amazonia. The land is so dry, never been so dry. It doesn't rain as it used to because in Brazil, they want more land, so they're cutting all the trees and changing their own climate, which affect every one of us. And at home, the good thing about the climate change is that in our prophecy, it says that one day when the world needs it most, the trees will stand again. And lo and behold, the trees are now standing again. Right next to the big ice, the, in 63, the bushes were no taller than up to my ankle. Now they're more than 5 meters tall, north of the Arctic Circle.
Thank you. This river in Latin America, there was a report in the New York Times just last weekend that Arana River or something is between Brazil and Argentina. And this little boy that used to travel to school in 15 minutes by boat now has to walk 2 hours each way to get to school because the river has dried up. Ariel, what can you say from your Canadian Indigenous perspective? What have you noticed in your northern lands about what is happening with climate change? And the question I want all of you to consider is, it occurs to me that for a Westerner like me, I'm not so connected with the land. You know, like I suppose I wish I was, but I'm not. Culturally, I'm kind of cut off. So I can read about these news, and it's shocking and it's scary. But maybe on an emotional level, it doesn't hit me as much as it might strike an indigenous person because indigenous people are still so much more connected with the land. So when you're describing these changes, they're not just geographic or geological or climatological. They also must be striking you on a very deep emotional level, I imagine. Ariel, I wonder what you can tell us about your experience.
So, Masicho Iklanete. So I'm Dene or Dene Sotlene, which is we live in the subarctic, excuse me, and the Arctic regions of so-called Canada. And my people live in a territory called Treaty 8, which is located in the territories of northern Alberta, in Canada. And I think first off, this challenging reconciliation of what it means to be an Indigenous person and experiencing climate change and a non-Indigenous person is one that is really difficult for a lot of folks. And I work primarily in the climate justice movement, and I've seen it. We have a lot of, settler society in North America that are concerned about the trees, they're concerned about the rivers, they're concerned about the animals, but they're concerned about them as an externality. And when it comes to the impacts that we've seen on the land as Indigenous peoples, we have to actually start from the beginning. Because climate change for our communities began at first contact. It didn't begin in 1801 when the German naturalists noticed that deforestation was changing the landscape. Our people noticed the changes to our landscapes, our identities, our kinships with our species, keystone species from whatever communities we came from whether that was the caribou or the seals or the herring or the frogs or the moose or the bears. We all had these deep rooted kinships. I come from a territory that's called Kaitale Dene Sotlene. People of the willow and people of the land is what it means in my language. And it is inseparable. We come from the Athabasca Delta region. It's one of the last inland freshwater deltas of the world. It provides massive amounts of fresh water sources to the entire planet. And it's a natural filtration system that filters the water systems through ferns and ecological structures that our people have lived in harmony with since time immemorial. As a child, I grew up within these landscapes on the eastern shores of Lake Athabasca in a province now known as Saskatchewan. And we lived on the land. We lived on the land. My grandfather and my father and my mother built cabins, a series of cabins, and they did this in the face of colonization because they did this because our lands were set to be explored and developed for uranium mining. And as my parents lived there on the land, gathering, traveling by dog team, hauling our water, hauling our foods, hunting our fish and meats, making clothes, living off of the land. This isn't something that we were doing as an externality. This was what my father knew deeply. My father lived on the land with his father, and his father lived on the land with his father, and so on and so forth. And these are traditions, and they're not traditions as is something that you do as like the family tradition to go on a vacation somewhere. These are traditions that are deeply ingrained in our identities. From our relationships and our kinships to the eagles and the bears and the moose and the muskrat in my territory, these are a part of our relations. And so when we see them start to unravel, these systems start to unravel, whether that's through the hands of colonization, through the extractivism that exists within our territories, whether that's uranium mining in the 70s, to the tar sands extraction in the 90s and into common day, we're seeing our lands being torn and ripped apart and destroyed. And that's coming on top of the colonial impacts that we felt from our children being ripped out of our homes, from our languages being stripped from the mouths of our families and our communities, from the forced assimilation tactics. And there's trauma upon trauma upon trauma. And then here we are in 2021, and we are feeling the impacts of climate change. So my community has already seen our water systems dewatered for oil and gas. We've seen our trees chopped down for deforestation. We've seen our lands ripped apart for uranium. We've seen our water systems completely destabilized for mega hydro projects that power big cities. Yet we remain a community that has issues with clean water. We remain a community that has issues with access to clean, sustainable energy sources, issues around a suitable housing, and issues around pandemics of trauma that are deeply rooted in our community. And now, in the last 20 years, we have seen complete disruptions to the migration of keystone species like caribou and moose. We've seen complete disruptions of our water table to the point that it's not just about the industry removing water from our systems, but the destabilization of the precipitation patterns in the climate are changing the way in which water moves in our lands and territories. Places that were traditional fishing grounds are no longer fishing grounds anymore because the water is too low and the water is too warm. And now people are having to travel further and further out from our Great Lakes to find sustainable food sources. And what this does, this message that it sends to our communities is that way of life, those kinships, those relations that we have with these ecosystems and these places is not of value. It's of no use in this common modern world for us to have these relationships. And for me, it hurts my soul. And when I say it hurts, I don't mean like I'm so emotional about it, but it's like literally seeing your family members becoming sick, becoming ill in front of you, watching them like their health completely disintegrate. And you're saying to everyone, we need to do something. We have to stop this. My relative, my kin, they are dying. And there's no logical connection to so many people to understand that when I grew up, every blade of grass, every tree, every medicine, every berry, every animal, from the rocks and the rivers to the rivers themselves, to the air and the stars and the moon and the sun, I was taught that they are my relatives, that we are a part of a great cycle of life, and that we have to move in respect of that cycle and our place in society, and that we are here to not just take and consume, but to live in relationship. And so when we disrupt these relationships, And we say that this is okay to extract. And we say it's okay that climate has some impact on some people, but we're going to fix it by building, greenhouses and aquaponics and all these other structures to sort of safeguard urban society. But the lives and the kinships that we have held as indigenous peoples to these natural spaces, the Kaitale, the people of the willow, what does that mean? The chief of my nation once said, if they destroy the delta, then who are we? The delta is who we are. It is inseparable. If the delta is destroyed, whether it's by extractivism or climate change, then what happens to our people? What happens to our identity? What happens to that relationship that we have held with these spaces since time immemorial? And that is this deep rooted trauma that weighs heavy on our people. And we hold that every day as we move through, trying to move through systems of capitalism that tell us that we have to participate in these structures that are counterintuitive to the ideological values that our communities have held for generations and generations. And we have to talk about not just the trauma of climate change, but the root causes of climate change being capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, and how we uncouple ourselves from that and move forward in a way to solve the crisis that doesn't ignore those things and serves a climate justice platform that includes all of us, human and non-human alike, in our solutions to the problem.
Thank you. Thank you, Eriel. Bayo, I'd like to move to you next. Ariel just mentioned colonialism, capitalism, and climate change as being inextricable from one and the other. Certainly in your country of origin, Nigeria, we were talking just before the interview about the civil war that took place 50 years ago now, I think, half a century ago. In the West, we like to look on these things as sort of African tribal grievances.
Conflagrations, conflicts,
But,
yeah.
but underneath all that, of course, is oil and colonialism. So, what can you say to us about your experience and your people's experience of climate change as it's related to the world system that we live in?
Right. After my dear sister Eriel spoke, I didn't feel like saying anything else. It's like everything that needs to be said. And I thank you for speaking that way, and my dear uncle as well for bringing that in. There is a sense in which people externalize climate change like the symptoms of the outside, right? Weather patterns, climatic effects. It's a problem for the outside. So if I can situate myself in an air-conditioned inside, then I'm largely safe from the troubles of the outside. So let me borrow a leaf from the efforts to reduce climate change to global warming, for instance. And I could speak to that for a moment. Since the 1960s, Lake Chad has lost 90% of its body, right? For thousands of years, it had fed the planet, and now it's drying out. And to buttress the point that climate change is not just weather patterns, it spills into how we relate with each other. It spills into how we dream, how we eat, how we compose lyrics about the world around us. It's everything. It's my skin, right? As the water started to dry out in Lake Chad, the farmers and their goat herders started to come down, into the hinterlands, into Nigeria, and that caused conflict. And now we have wars, in the middle belt. We have farmers and goat herders and more stationary communities always at their necks fighting each other. These are the unexpected effects of climate change. But like my sister also said, climate change isn't global warming. It's colonization. It's the legacies of extractivism and displacement and colonization. Yes, Humboldt didn't discover it in 1801. In the 15th century, 11 million people were taken across the Atlantic, right? That was climate change. I don't understand how to think about climate change except to think about it through the prisms of the slave ship traveling across the Atlantic. That was climate change, if you could ever speak about it. And in carting those souls, in taking those souls, stealing their bodies in this global solar labor project, they dismantled the systems with which we relate with each other, and disrupted the languages with which we meet the gods and the goddesses and the relationalities that thread our own worlds. And so there is a very, very critical sense in which we're being invited to notice that uh, what scientists, call the Anthropocene, as this urgent point where we must galvanize the entire planet into this cautionary tale of noticing that we're in trouble, that it's not just a symptom of something gone wrong, that it is connected with decades, hundreds of years of displacement and denial and repression and oppression and colonization. It is not just arriving at the point, we must notice the cracks as well. And that we are in this place we are in right now because of this humanizing, I think someone once called it a brutal humanism, this attempt to separate us from the world, this attempt to create a metabolic rift, to insist that we are individuals, right? I think of the anthropos, or the individual, as the project of modernity. And so what modernity is trying to do is to carve us out of our kinships with the world around us, and to insist that we are our own. We are atomic Newtonian creatures, and that the only way to be in the world is to live as separate, or as separately as we can. My people are learning to um, find other stories. I should say at this point that I don't even speak my language, and that's an effect of climate change, because I grew up in the wake of colonial departure. I grew up learning to think that English was the only legible or respectable form of communication. That's climate change. Um, I grew up thinking that the only way to be in the world is to learn as much as possible and migrate to the West, because that's where the good universities are. That's where expertise comes from. That's where the real life is. And so we had songs about, come and see American Wonder. We would sing on the streets when I was a kid. Come and see American Wonder. It was a way to say, get out of this neighborhood as fast as you can, right? So the trauma of climate change, has always lived with us. Um, right before the 70s, right before Humboldt, we passed it on to each other. This subtle story that we're not enough. This idea that we need to be supplemented by Western interruptions, Western interventions, whether it comes in form of the structural adjustment program from the World Bank, or whether it comes from, weaponry from the US, to support us in fighting our wars properly. Um, we have always seen ourselves as inferior. And so we're learning to take that back. We're learning to see differently. And I think our techno-bureaucratic attempts to solve climate change by throwing money at the symptoms, or throwing policy at the symptoms, is beside the point. Because the point is not that we've lost something in the program we're trying to make. The point is that we are performing ourselves as superior to the land. Yoruba indigenous traditions, and the Ifa tradition, um, would speak of us as imbricated with systems. It's possible to read Yoruba traditions that way. We're imbricated with land, we're imbricated with space, we're imbricated with ancestry. And ancestry is not a thing that has passed. Ancestry is contemporary, right? Time is not even linear, right? So trauma is not something that was passed from the past. Trauma is the cybernetic patterns that keeps on repeating itself ecologically, spiritually, corporally. So we keep on reiterating those deadening patterns, especially when we think of ourselves as subjects on a linearity. And the invitation I feel from my people is to listen, is to humble ourselves enough to fall down to the earth and listen differently. Listen to ancestry, listen to the world around us that we've numbed and muted as resource in our attempts to progress beyond the planet.
Well, thank you. So I have to. You mentioned inferiority. I have to confess to all three of you that I sit here. How should I say this? With a deep sense of my own inferiority, because the depth and the soul connection that all three of you speak about nature and the land and existence itself has been really drained out of my own culture and is missing from my own life. And I've always thought that apart from the economic and political and power considerations that the West has imposed on the rest of the world, I imagine on some level these Western colonialists must have felt deeply inferior to the spiritual greatness and aliveness of the people that they were conquering. And some of what they did, sure, it was out of sheer calculation and economic gain and exploitation and all that. But psychologically, I think there was also a sense of inferiority to this vastness that they had lost connection with and that I feel I've lost connection with. So what I'm going to ask all three of you now is, what and how can we learn from indigenous traditions that might actually help save us from ourselves, if I can put it that way? I hope that question is clear. And I don't want to romanticize or idealize anything. I just sense that there's a deep wisdom there that somehow, if in our arrogance, and I'm speaking arrogance as the Western Northern culture, if we could somehow drop our arrogance a little bit and open ourselves to learning, what could we learn from you that could bring us back to ourselves and stop this madness?
You know, there's actually nothing we can learn anymore. We know so much, but comprehend so little of what we know. That's what my father used to tell us. You and I, we know so much, but comprehend so little of what we know. This modern day climate change is pretty new in terms of us on top of the world. In 1963, in the month of January, two young men went hunting for caribou by the dog sleds, which is about 400-kilometer drive to the beach of the Big Ice. So the eldest went hunt in the month of March, and lo and behold, water was coming out of the Big Ice. It'd been minus 35 Celsius at least for 5 months, and the water was not coming out. What it turned out to be that in summer melt on the top of the Big Ice, water, I don't know if people knew that, but water is a living thing, just like you and I. So she finds the cracks and goes down so far down inside the Big Ice that she does not freeze when it is minus 60 Celsius. But because she's a living thing, she finds cracks. And the ice is a living thing. It's just a frozen water. So the, every time she moves, a crack is born. And that water kept coming out and dripped out of the Big Ice. That was the first time my people noticed that there's a phenomena going on which we have not known in the living memory. Then, of course, when Greenpeace stopped us hunting seals, there was no more fish to have. So the people of the Pope could not have fish on their Friday night dinner because a seal is like a pig on land. She creates children, or seal would give birth to about 40 children, species of that 40 times she would give birth. And they live a long time when they're not hunted. So now we have millions of seals between Baffin Island and Greenland. and of course it's affecting everything. The food you had to put on your table tonight is affected by green peas 40 years ago. So it goes on and on and on. But how do we do things differently? My people have been really resourceful. They are from being hunting the seals and the whales, now they fish. But it is insatiable desire for fish that they had changed. So they have made some nets in the ocean where cod is being caught and put into the net, and then the fish in thousands of them just die because there's so much fresh water coming from the rivers that cod cannot live in the fresh water. So they just die. Tons and tons of them just die because they put the fish inside the net too close to the beach, where so many rivers are flowing out from the big ice, taking away the salt water. So we go through that over and over, no matter what we do. Now, as it is now, Greenland, my country, has become an eye for the mining. And it is so interesting process. The trauma, beside the language, by the way, there are people in my family who cannot speak their language anymore because they had to learn Danish, which is a world language. And it's so interesting to watch my cousins not being able to talk to their grandchildren because they don't speak the language. And the grandparents, my cousins, don't speak Danish. So the trauma goes on and on and on. And one day it will collapse all of us. How would it collapse us? We had to stop war amongst ourselves, but I cannot stop war unless I stop a war inside myself. It was so interesting when I was young. I was a runner for the elders. My job was to bring home to Greenland whom I met, what I saw, what I experienced, and what I heard. That was my job as a runner, because I was going to tell the world about the big ice is melting and it's going to have a very severe impact to the world. And it's so interesting and nobody believed it. So I wanted to quit. But in the meantime, I call it the Christmas cards, postcards. I don't know if you remember them. And I came home and all these beautiful elders were sitting there at my mother's little house. And there was a postcard, this old man, 90 some years old, was asking me, my son, can you read for me what it says? And I read it, peace on earth and Merry Christmas. And this man looked at me with such wonder in his eyes. Do these Americans only want peace on Christmas Day? So I didn't know exactly how to answer that question. So I carried on. But it made me aware so much deeper the impact of the world I live in now from the world I grew up. I grew up on a small village of 3 houses for the first 12 years of my life. Grandmothers raised us because the mother and father had to hunt and fish to provide because there was no Walmarts in those days. So mother and father had to be busy, and then we be raised by the grandmother, and my father's mother was the one who raised us. And it's so interesting that we were told to listen to the stories. Now today, I'm really privileged to tell that I can now tell a living story. because I was told the same story hundreds of times. And when I became a teenager, I would say, "Oh God, grandmother, I heard that before." And she would smile, a beautiful smile, and tell the same story again. Listen, listen, then listen more. Only then can you tell a living story. And that's the one which have saved me, that I can live out on the land like I grew up with it. And I can live in the big city, Ottawa, or New York City, or New Delhi, or Rio, or Tokyo. Trauma exists in every one of us. We are now putting our earth into traumatic condition, and there is no way out. There simply is no way out at this moment.
Thank you. Ariel, if we
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I just want to draw out here, because first off, going back to this question of like, what can we learn from indigenous peoples in addressing the climate crisis, is I always say humility. Humility is one of the biggest things that we can learn from indigenous communities. I remember growing up, and the way in which we were taught things was to not center ourselves as being the best at something, but being humble enough to listen. And so Bayo's comment of humble ourselves enough to fall down to the earth is so pertinent to me, because it's like, so, and it's relevant. I remember going out and my dad was teaching us how to track animals in the snow, and we were out walking, and I was just like, I was maybe 7 years old, and I'm like, well, what's that? What's that? Like asking all these questions every 5 minutes. And my dad just said, shh, just listen. And I'm like, listen to what? Like, I didn't know what I was listening to. And he's just like, just listen. And by the end of that year, when I'd go out with my dad, I didn't talk. I just listened. And I listened to the language of the land became something that was akin to my understanding of how I worked in relationship in the world. And that takes humility to understand that the verbal languages that we speak to each other are only one way of relating and being in relationship. And when it comes to how then do we learn this? Well, first off, we have in this society deep roots of not just colonialism and capitalism and patriarchy, but deep roots of white supremacy, deep roots of worship of the written word, hyper-individuality, and of course, in the face of climate change, Western science. But the reality is, as indigenous communities, when you break it down to what we have been doing for thousands of years, is practicing forms of science. I was listening to a podcast the other day about nature-based solutions and carbon offsets because I work within the environmental movement. I understand climate science deeply. What is really challenging to me and frustrating to me as an Indigenous rights advocate working within this field is the fact that we are forced to understand the deep, intricate understandings of Western science to participate in the conversations around the climate crisis and solutions, when there is little of that same reciprocity given back to our communities. We have been participating in systematic reviews of all of the existing evidence around climate change for centuries. Uncle's story is that science is observation, and Indigenous peoples have been some of the best observers that have passed down our knowledge through generation, where we have been observing these ecosystems for thousands of years. And then we talk about science is about looking at systematic reviews, doing all of these experiments, filling the gaps by doing research, tangible research. That tangible research is going out there, testing those waters, understanding and being in relationship with these spaces, and then bringing all the evidence together to create best practices and provide evidence for decision makers. These are the parameters for how we operate under Western science. But when Indigenous peoples do it in the ways that we have for thousands of years, it is not valued, it is not respected. We are told it's anecdotal, and we are told that it's not valid within these discussions. The same can be said for when we talk about how we interpret the solutions to the crisis. The solutions to the crisis are not stuck within these very narrow parameters, because current Western science is narrow in scope because it doesn't have the same timelines that Indigenous science and knowledge has. And therefore, our solutions are much more broad and expansive because our timelines of understanding our relationships to these ecosystems and the natural world are not only driven by this narrow scope, but they're driven by a language that has been lost by humanity. This language that has been lost of humanity through systems of hyper-individuality, systems of colonialism, white supremacy, and at the hands of colonizers and settlers from European descent. And where did that come from? There's a really incredible, I believe he was in your previous talks, Resma Menachem. He talks about how even the trauma of settler white society comes from the traumas that they experience in themselves, and then the cycles continue. Just like, my father who was beat in residential schools also hit us because that was a learned behavior, and so on and so forth. So we learn these behaviors through these traumatic incidents that happen at some point somewhere along the line, and they keep cycling through. And we have this tremendous opportunity where we have so many Indigenous cultures across the world that are reclaiming and saying, no, my culture, my language, my understanding, the value systems, the sciences, the governance structures, the education models, everything that we had for thousands and thousands and thousands of years is not demonized, is not devalued. And we are going to advance and push these things forward. And we are going to propose solutions that are outside the scope and the narrow parameters of colonial and Western science and ideologies and value systems. That requires us to not decouple and disembody ourselves from the climate crisis, but to place ourselves within these structures and systems, moving away from the mentality of scarcity to the mentality of abundance. We have to move the line forward, because in our communities, there is so much abundance. When you are taking the moose from the land and you leave that offering, there is reciprocity, there are circles. There are circles of lives where we retain that relationship and understanding that what I take, I have to give back. We are in relationship. And when we continue to be in relationship, you continue to see abundance. I want to read one small quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer because she's one of my favorite ethnobotanists, indigenous people in the world. But she said, to name the world as a gift is to feel one's membership in the web of reciprocity. It makes you happy and it makes you accountable. Conceiving of something as a gift changes your relationship to it in a profound way, even though the physical makeup of the thing has not changed. A woolly knit hat that you purchase at the store will keep you warm regardless of its origins. But if it was hand knit by your favorite auntie, then you are in relationship to that thing in a very different way. You are responsible for it, and your gratitude has motive force in the world. You're likely to take much better care of the gift hat than that of a commodity hat because it is knit in relationship. This is the power of gift thinking. I imagine if we acknowledge that everything we consume is the gift of Mother Earth, we would take better care of what we were given. Mistreating a gift has emotional and ethical gravity as well as ecological resonance. And our communities have lived in these reciprocity gift relationships. The story that Uncle said, you gave your offering to the land so you can receive from the land. These are all gifts. You give a gift to receive a gift. And somehow our relationships change. And instead, we are focusing on solving this crisis as something that needs to be commodified and met with into the capitalist structures. We cannot solve the crisis climate the climate crisis unless we solve the economic crisis is completely backwards. We need to be rebalancing ourselves and our relationships with the natural world and one another to move forward. And that takes humility. That takes saying that the structures that we have are not the only structures. This takes a tremendous amount of work towards working through decolonization, the deconstruction of something to make room for more. It is that reconnection to the natural living world and moving forward to peace and reciprocity and relationships of abundance. And there's so much to learn from Indigenous communities, and the amount that we can learn is tremendous. But when an elder once said, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, so we can listen twice as much as we speak.
Wow, thank you so much. You know, when I look at Western medicine, Western anything, it's all about separation. We separate the mind from the body. We separate ourselves from nature. We separate ourselves from other people. And it wasn't accidental that in Canada, colonialism really tried to destroy the relationships of Indigenous people by denying the matriarchal lines of transmission, by actually denying gift giving, by making gift giving illegal. So they knew that in order to gain dominance, they had to destroy relationship. Again, it's just so moving to listen to all of you. Bayo, I'd like to give you the final word here. What can we learn? What can tradition teach us? How can we restore relationship? How can we move away from this terrible legacy of colonialism and separation?
Hmm. Uh, I think it needs to be said that we're not going to arrive intact. I think Uncle has been saying it. We're not going to solve this. Um, if we could, if we could reverse time, if our Paris agreements could actually produce something, if our multiple policies and legislations could actually do something, if we could somehow pump money into the uh, into technologies that reverse ocean acidification, if we could sequester all the carbon in the atmosphere, if we could solve this thing, we still wouldn't have addressed the heart of the matter, right? And that's something techno-bureaucratic patterns and institutions don't quite get, right? And this isn't about just fixing stuff. So I hear sometimes when people ask, so what do we do about this? You know, there is, I hear the echoes of this familiar cognitive extractivism, right? That swings into action, takes insights from around the world, and then, like the tortoise in our folklore story, in our stories, puts it into the calabash, just like Google is trying to do with data, right? And converts it into consumable bytes, you know, of info, right? So it's now in our toolkit. And I think that's the dangerous thing here, that we're trying to meet a world, we're trying to meet uncanny intelligences with the anthropocentric moves and gestures that we're used to. And this is why my elders would say, in order to find your way, you must become lost, right? That there is an invitation to lose one's way here. I often think quite seditiously that uh, that it's not even that people have trauma, right? Uh, there is a sense in which we've gotten used to speaking as subjects of modern arrangements and settlements, as if the individual is a fait accompli, right? So individuals have trauma, just like we would say individuals have emotions. And there is an extent, you know, to which you can say that, you know, if we reapply humanist constraints. But if we relax some of those constraints and we start thinking with anima mundi. We start thinking with the Yorubas when they talk about aye, the conspiratorial spread of agency that is not something to be had like property, that connects everything together in unlanguageable, networks of becoming. If we think through these paradigms of emergence, then one might even come to suggest that trauma is ecological, right? Trauma is atmospheric, it's volatile, it's placemaking, it's almost agential in how it shows up. So it's not that we have trauma, it's that trauma enlists bodies in how it comes to matter, right? So we're not just witnessing a global warming of carbon, it's a global warming of despair in a sense, right? How we feel secreted through bodies into bodies, right? I think it was Teresa Brennan that spoke about the transmission of affect, right? So we secrete, like ants secrete pheromone, we bleed into each other these feelings, and we're passing it across in these arrangements, how we live our lives, how we eat. We're transmitting molecularly these feelings of despair. But that is also where the emancipation lies, what my sister was speaking about when she spoke about decolonization, that even within the heart of the beast, there are cracks of other spaces of power, right? We tell the stories across, in Africa and across the Atlantic, of how people on the slave ships would outwit their masters. They invented capoeira, the Brazilian, Afro-Brazilian martial arts, to outwit, to upset the master's regime. Under their noses, they congregated fugitive ways of being in the world. And I think we must come to that kind of, arrangement. We must enact a translocal experiment, inquiry into how we might become lost. And I want to say this before even I go into what becoming lost might look like, that there is a sense in which modernity incarcerates indigeneity with questions such as, okay, we need you guys to take us out of this problem. There is a sense in which it freezes it into some kind of what they call the magic Negro, right? You guys have all the problem. You guys have all the solutions. Produce for us, right? We've lost our way. So help us, help us. And there's something that is dangerous about that. It almost fixes us into a place where we think we have to return to an original, right? And reiterate or reproduce an original. And that is dangerous for us as well, because the world is moving, like Chinua Achebe said, and the world moves and there's no place to stand still, right? So even indigeneity is a modern category. It's a colonial concept of capture. And so we are moving together, and I can tell you stories about how samba and how capoeira and how these wonderful fugitive technologies emerged and how they performed lostness, right? How they performed a form of humility that meant us keenly being aware of the world and its emergence around us. So I would say that we need new patterns of learning together that the university cannot provide us. We need new ways of thinking of ourselves as growing beyond the individual. We cannot afford to be saved any longer, Gabor. Salvation is the imperative of the plantation. Now we must steal away, and we must learn to collectively steal away from the imperatives of the cotton plantation. We must learn how to get lost together, and that might take form. I can't even describe what forms that take. But it will emerge translocally. It will emerge from us learning to listen to place, learning to gravitate towards incompleteness, because modernity is the paradigm of completion, of purity, of ascension, of arrival. Now we are being invited to recognize that we are not all that. We're not as coherent or as whole as we think we are. So these are invitations. These are cartographies of failure. These are places where we're being invited to touch our wounds and see those wounds as emancipatory, as decolonial, as invitational, as ancestral porous membranes. So we can do other things with that energy. So it's not entirely left to us. That's how I end this. That it's not entirely left to us to solve these problems. If it were left to us, then we will be reinscribing an anthropocentricity that I find deeply troubling and problematic. It's not entirely left to us. That's where humility finds its feet, to know that we're not going to solve this problem. Bill Gates is not going to get us out of this shit. We're not going to assemble and say kumbaya. IPCC is not going to solve the day. We will need to sit with failure. We will need to sit within cracks, and listen deeply. We would need to pass failure down, like the Mexicans eat with la coche. We would need with la coche politics. We would need to think about pathogens, fungal pathogens, as friends. We would probably need to think of the coronavirus as an alien invasion, not a war, but a visitor that we might need to listen to and be hospitable to. So a paradigm shift is demanded, or is what we need at this point in time. Solutions, no. Failure, cosmic humility, modesty raised to the nth degree is probably what we're looking for.
I just want to say one thing, because I'm just whoo, all of that. That is it. And if we are not tackling this challenge that we are at from a holistic point, from dealing with all of the traumas that we've had, all of the issues that have separated us to create the crisis that we're in, we are just going to I love that anthropogenic. If we attack the climate crisis from an anthropogenic place, we are doomed to recreate those cycles. And going back to Uncle's original story on the tree, that tree grows, we know that there's hope. And there's something to be said to trust the natural world, to trust those relationships, to provide us with the answers that we don't have to articulate. My dad didn't have to articulate to me the understanding of what it meant to trap or to track animals. I learned that from listening to the land. And we can learn that from listening to the trees that are growing in Greenland, and listening and being humble. And that is the thing that needs to happen. But that requires us to be still, to be quiet, to listen, and to sit with our relationships with ourselves and with each other. And that requires deep healing, because all of those traumas have created all of this noise. And we can come from these things from a cognitive place, like we're doing within the IPCC, like we're doing with all of these government structures. But if we don't address this holistically as our whole selves, and our whole selves being the human race and life on this planet, then we are going to continue to repeat and repeat and repeat these cycles of destruction.
Sister, we need to become animals, right? We need to become animals.
We are animals.
Human is not going to cut it.
Gabor, can I just tell you, this is my instrument. Her name is Qilaud, which means an instrument from the great sky. In my tradition, when I was growing up, I would ask, why did my father told us, if the indigenous Eskimos of Greenland have not helped the white man, they would have frozen to death. But we welcomed them, I gave them our names, teach them how to hunt, and to survive in a climate which is very different from the rest of the world. But then we have this instrument, and this is a circle. The circle which has no beginning and no ending, in which we all belong. The beauty of the circle is that we cannot see each other's. The beauty of the circle is that we cannot see each other's backs, and the strength of the circle is that we can only see each other's beauty. In the east, when the sun rises, sees yellow. Now we have learned that there are actually yellow people on this earth. And in the south, when sun shines highest upon us, sees always white. Now we have learned that actually white people on this earth. And in the west, where the sun sets, she's always red. And that's indigenous world. And now we have learned that we have indigenous people, red people. And at night, it's always black. Now we have learned that black people on this earth. This is it. We only have one heartbeat, all of us. One day when you and I will learn to live together like that, then things will really change for every one of us. We will accept each other. And yes, they would take our science knowledge seriously, not their own. They will realize that water, when it is polluted, is no longer any good for us. We haven't learned it yet. It's a simple thing. I was on a Zoom the other day with my Hopi elders who are now thirsty because the farmers of Arizona are taking the aquifers. And for the first time in their millennial history, they are thirsty because the white men have not learned how to use water. They just brush their teeth. At least 5 to 10 liters goes into the sink and disappears by brushing the teeth. And then having a shower, it just disappears. We don't reuse the water, but the world is hungry. They say that the old people, they say that the language we come with the tongue, the language of the heart, and the language of the mind, when we put them together, it's like that. And it's really interesting what she does. Ho ho! Ho ho! Ho ho!
I had no idea what to expect when we set up this conversation. I can tell you it leaves me a bit fried, but in a good sense. Bayo, you're the first time I ever heard get lost in a positive way, you know? We should all get lost and realize that we're lost. You know, in Dante's Inferno begins with the line that midway through life I lost my way. And then he has to find his way back to purgatory and then to heaven, you know? So that's where we're at. I rarely have the experience of being in a conversation where I literally experience my mind expanding. And I don't mean my intellect expanding. That's big enough as it is. I'm talking about my mind expanding, the mind in the sense of the whole being and the heart and the gut. And I don't even know what to say except to thank you all. I can hardly wait to watch the video of this conversation again so I can take it in once more and be informed by it. Thank you all so very much. And I just hope, well, I pray and I have some confidence that we'll learn the lessons that you have all imparted. Thank you again. Zaya Murcio, do you want to come in and say anything before we finish?
We're kind of speechless.
I just want to
What
say
a
that, dear brother, sister, and uncle, you really touch me as in a way that as Gabor said, is not intellectual knowledge, is not I don't even know what I heard. But I know that there is a part in my body that heard something really loud and clear. And yeah, that's all I can say.
I feel expanded very much, and I feel lost as well in a good way. Bayo, thank you for that. And one thing that kept coming is like, you know, how trauma actually restricts the way we see the world. Trauma restricts relationships, and you know, maybe perhaps being lost is the first stage of healing, like when we kind of loosen the grip of righteousness and one way of being. And that's all of you have reminded us that we are, yes, embedded in fields, scapes of relationships, and in trauma. But trauma is where we have the disrupted relationships. There's still relationships, but they have been disrupted. So something about what you all brought here, this holistic, wholesome way of viewing about our wounds that, like Uncle said, we all have. And so thank you all. Thank you.
And gratitude to you all, Brother Gabor, my dear uncle, my newfound sister. This has been wonderful. Thank you for this puddle of emancipation and liberation. Thank you.
And please bring my greetings of love and respect to all your families.
Yes.
One day, tell them one day when they meet Uncle downtown where they live, they will offer him a cup of coffee.
I don't take coffee, but I'll take everything else, brother.
Thank you
I will,
so
Uncle.
much.
I will, Uncle. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of this
Bayo,
great
Mauricio.
experience. And Uncle, I have actually been to Greenland. I spent a month there in 2007 in Ilulissat.
Oh, where in
And
Ilulissat?
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I'm born in Ilulissat. You could see my village where I was born on the big island.
Yeah, it was really incredible. I spent a month out there. I was working with indigenous peoples from all over the world, and we were discussing. It was a course that I took in
Yeah.
partnership with
And
a
I'm
group.
confident that I have met your grandparents and your
Probably.
mom and dad probably out in the Yellowknife walking downtown or Hay River.
Thank you so much, Azara and Maurizio, for making this happen, and Gabor for hosting this conversation. It was really affirming, would be the word, affirming.
Well, I'm just going to say thank you again, and I'm going to say goodbye. And this experience will be with me for a long time. Let me tell you.
Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.